Our next presentation deals with retail media. Our presenter is James Tenser, Principal of VSN Strategies. James, take it away.
Well, thank you, John. It's terrific to be back again at the Lead Marketing Conference. And as some of our audience, I hope, will know, I really enjoy interpreting events in our world for loyalty, engagement, analytics, and digital, and strategizing about what happens next. And I think what happens next for me is the most interesting and most fun. As we get going, I want to compliment our previous presenter, Joel Cartwright. I thought his presentation was fascinating, and especially his comments about joint business planning. And I hope I can come close in that degree of relevance. In particular, I want to suggest that keep some of his remarks about contract complexity in mind as we pursue our discussion here about retail media. I think you'll see the connection. The premise of this presentation is to look into some issues where we don't know all the answers yet. The continuing rise of retail media networks has a lot of implications for CPG marketers, and they're trying to work out how to attack, that's an aggressive word, to tackle the retail media opportunity in a way that's balanced and that serves their best interests of their brands across the entire distribution. So some of these questions are going to seem, some of the information is going to seem familiar to many of you, and it comes from a bunch of sources. And the more I look, the more I keep finding. But there's also some issues that have been nagging at me, and I am learning from my queries, they're nagging at some of you as well about how are we going to make the right kinds of decisions in retail media. And in particular, how do we do this in proportion to the product distribution standards we've already established for many, many years? How do we align the message with the distribution? Not that easy. So let's start with a quick look at some of the latest stats. And these come from, I think, the most reliable sources I know in this business, one of which is eMarketer. This chart on the right-hand side is the newest projection and tally of retail media spending. And it's notable that the headline that it accounts for almost 1/4 of all the U.S. media ad spending, or will account for it by 2028. It's also worth noting that I think it's the blue line here, the percent of total media spend. That's on quite a rise in high double digits. But the number of this year, 67. Pardon me. The number for this year is $55 billion in spending on retail media across all forms. Of that, grocery is about 8 to 9 billion, and that number comes from Incisive, their grocery Doppio research arm. I think it's a reliable number. And a smaller fraction is the in-store retail media revenue, 370 million. Not as impressive a number yet as the rest. And the rest, of course, is digital. It's retail media spending. It's associated with the digital channels operated by retailers. And in addition to those, you could argue that the Amazons and Walmarts of the world, is that part of the retail organization, or is it something parallel and separate? Incisive also reports that 70% of grocers plan to put in-store media deployments in the coming 18 months. And that's pretty important because it signals to us that retail companies in America desperately want a fair share of the brand's spending on retail media. They need it, honestly, to remain competitive with the large players in this market. eMarketer sees that we're going to double or more by 2027. And the spending for retailers has this, and this is no secret, this remarkably favorable margin compared with the products they sell. So the digital thing we sell, or the advertising space that the retailer sells, starts out just much more profitable if you can get it. And that's a big if. So a question this raises for me is, well, how evenly is this spending allocated across our distribution system? And I tried to do a little bit of inquiry. But to get us started, let's ask a question of the assembly here. Oops, I'm going to go back. This is an instant poll question. Are your brands reallocating any portion of their marketing investment from your trade promotion budgets into retail media advertising? So I'm going to allow a few moments here to see if, and by the way, if you're not a brand company, but you work with brands, answer is if you were. And as some of you may know, this question is asked not out of the clear blue, but also based on some things that we're hearing in market. Why? Give it 30 seconds. Very well. Well, I won't keep things quiet so much. Obviously, it's just a handful of responses. My takeaway is some, not none. And that's probably close to what we hear anecdotally. I'm going to click this off. And I think we have to close this, and then we're going to return. Is that correct, Linda? Thank you. So with that in mind, the numbers on this particular poll question are less important than the reality that there are some discussions, and this is what we're hearing anecdotally, where brands are making decisions about what part of our spending should be allocated to retail media and where does the money come from. Now, when I first heard about the retail media phenomenon a few years ago, I figured, well, no retailer will ever allow a brand to take a dime out of their current allowances and trade marketing spending to transfer here. Why would you add the complexity to move a fund from one pocket to another? As it turns out, though, that there may be reasons why this is justified. It's part of a larger picture. So I took a look at, I think, the organization I think is our best observer about where brands marketing spending is going. And this is from Cadent Research, Cadent Consulting. The principals there have been tracking this kind of data for several decades. I think they're by far the reliable source, very likely familiar to you. There are a couple of facts here that I think are very notable. And the first is in the top circle. 73%, almost 3/4 of all marketing spending today is funneled through retailers in some way. And trade promotion is still the biggest of those. That's the top line here. And by the way, I want to make sure that we're seeing the pointer. Notably, the digital portion, the pale blue line, and the retail media portion, which is the red line, they're kind of related. Retail media, for the most part, other than that small amount we mentioned earlier that's in store, retail media is mostly digital media too. So brands have a complex decision process to make when it comes to how do we balance our spend. Now, I'm not saying something that's news to anybody here, in my opinion, but I am going to raise some questions about the implications of that for you going forward. Worth noting also is that this is not chicken feed. What other industry do we know of where brands are spending, and this is in the chart in the lower left, as much as 20% or slightly above 20% projected next year of their gross sales on marketing activity. That is the nature of CPG. It is a marketing animal. So it leaves a choice. Where do we take the money from to put into retail media if it is in fact advantageous to us? Do we take it from quote unquote traditional spending, television advertising, for example, or consumer promotions of the conventional sort? Or do we have to rebalance the spend we have with the retailer? And that becomes a sticky wicket because trade marketing has traditionally been, I'll use the word sacrosanct. Maybe it's not so much anymore. So this is a pretty tough situation for retailers to manage. I love this chart. It's from the Path to Purchase Institute, and they've done a really good job in putting together this eye chart of all the participants in the retail media landscape. The networks are in the center. The in-store networks, they aggregate screens and locations across multiple grocers. That's the upper left red wedge in this pie. There are non-retailer. Well, that's not of our concern today. There's digital out of home. Every one of these participants is trying to be a facilitator or make available some access to audience using retail media. It isn't simple. And if you own a brand, part of your challenge today is to wade through this and decide, who do we interact with here? The retail media networks in the center, now that's a large number. So the decision has become, where do I invest my money? Who do I have to just ignore because I don't have the bandwidth? How do I support the retailers that I care about, which is hopefully all of them? Do we have the expert bandwidth as an organization to do this fairly? And then the last question, and this is the one that is a poke in the ribs to this whole industry now, is what about Robinson-Patman? And by the way, this is the question that led me to try and do this investigation here. Are we going to be able to do this with the right proportionality across our entire retail distributor portfolio? Can we do it? Can we be even-handed? It's been the industry custom in trade marketing and shopper marketing to do this in a balanced way, in a fair way. In fact, when I did a little research into the Robinson-Patman situation, and I'm going to have more on this later, but it's not been an issue that's required enforcement. It seems that the industry has decided its custom is to be fair. If you represent X% of our product sales across the nation, then you're going to get an equivalent percent of our marketing investment, more or less, depending on the cost of doing business with you. Now, anyone on this call who has more specific knowledge than I do is free to disagree. Use the chat box to do this. But with all of these factors to consider, all of these different tools and intermediaries, I think this got a lot more complicated when retail media started to rear its head. So here's another question for you all, and this is important. Those of you who are aware of your company's activities in retail media, how many retail media networks are you presently investing in? And if you don't mind, it's pretty simple numbers. It could be none, it could be 6 or fewer. And again, if you're on the other side of the equation, answer on behalf of your brand partners. Very good.
James,
Right.
somebody in the chat box wrote in and said it is not optional. So.
Well, guess what? I believe you, and this is quite an interesting issue. We're going to explore some of the implications of that as we go on here, and believe me, in the questions, let me please. I want to dig into that a little bit more. In fact, I wish this was more interactive, because the truth is, it would be fascinating if we could do this in a room where we could kind of spitball a bit. But we'll do the best we can in this format. I guess we'll close this out. So the answer is, there are some. I'm remarkable to hear that here we have an answer 14 or more, because I want to understand how that is practically managed. But let's move ahead now, and let's talk about some of the things that we learned in the research. So we hear that the largest retail media networks tend to suck up all the oxygen in the room. And what do they all have in common? Well, they have scale, right? I mean, these are the ones we know about, Target, Kroger, Albertsons, Walmart Connect. If you're in Canada, Loblaw, so forth. The Instacart, which is not a retailer, but aggregates data across retailers. After you get done dealing with these, each of which has a unique platform, do you have the capabilities left to work with what I call the power regionals in grocery? The Myers, the Giant Eagles, the Publix, the Wegmans, the HEBs. All these are essential distribution points for CPG products. And they're putting up their own retail media networks. Well, I should add Hy-Vee as well, because they've been so vigorous about this. The platforms, though, are not identical. The way of interacting with them and making decisions are not identical. The access to data, the first-party data, which is an important part of the incentive to brands, varies. So when a brand thinks about the audience it wants to reach across the entire distribution spectrum, this becomes hard work. I hear this anecdotally. By the way, I have in no way qualified to do that decision-making or analysis, but I can certainly empathize with how challenging it is. And to the commenter we just heard from earlier, it's not optional. Well, there's the rub, isn't it? We don't have a choice, and yet we've got to find some ways to invest in retail media in a fair way across the ACV. So are there too many? Well, and this goes back to our prior question. Trade Desk Intelligence, which is one of the research organizations that did some research that I would regard as more representative than our quick poll here today, it said 57% of U.S. advertisers were willing to work with a maximum of 4 retail data partners. Now they're talking about the data aspect. Maximum of 4. That's a lot different than 14 or more, the response that we had earlier. Why would they have that kind of a response? And by the way, by the time they're done looking at the data from Walmart Connect, from let's not forget Amazon and perhaps Google, how much intellectual bandwidth is left? So I thought that was an important finding. At the same time, as we said earlier, 3/4 or 7 in 10 grocers are implementing new in-store retail media deployments in the coming 18 months. And most of them are buying rather than building, is what we hear. Again, this comes from that Grocery Doppio research. It's not clear about the standardization of measurement, the standardization of ad units. These are all areas that are still pretty fungible right now, and it make the challenge harder for brands. So can both these things be true? We're only going to work with 4 or 6, whatever the small number is, and yet the retailers are all going to stand up and say, "Hey, but we want our share." How do we balance that? Well, intermediaries might be part of the solution, right? Brands tend to buy media in traditional media with agencies. They look for audience scale, cost per thousand, right? They use automation, especially on the digital side, right? They need standards to make this possible, and they need, obviously, metrics in order to understand they've met their audience and measure the response. And there are in organizations, and some of them were on that pie chart we saw earlier from the Path to Purchase Institute. There are intermediary organizations that have platforms that are devising different ways to reach out. I don't know that it's an option to pick one and reach all the retailers in your portfolio. However, this is an area that I'm unable to have direct experience since I'm not a brand marketer. But it's another layer of interest. Now, are they helpful or not? If I had an opportunity to do a detailed piece of direct research, I'd be asking that question now. The key issue, though, is can you assemble the audience that's relevant to your brand's objectives and make targeted media buys through the retail media networks that are available, then measure the results in a way that allows you to guide further decisions and understand the return on your investment. Standards are a big part of the problem, a big part of the issue. So I yanked this quote out of the eMarketer guide. And incidentally, well, when you get a copy of this deck, I'll make sure that the link to this one, if you haven't found it, it's the eMarketer Guide to Retail Media that just recently published. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this one back to you. So retail media networks do not have a standard for ad measurement or for ad formats. And is the opinion of those authors, they won't have standardization anytime soon. Should that happen, it could unlock even more retail media ad spend, is their opinion. The Interactive Advertising Bureau has proposed some standardization models, and so far, though, those have not been adopted. The problem remains unsolved. I think standards are going to be a very important aspect of this. And it's not only how do we define an ad unit, how do we define audience metrics, but it may also be standards for how we assemble audiences across multiple retail networks. There's a lot of work going on here, a lot of effort. We hope that we'll see some published results put forth into the marketplace for consideration sooner than later, because if 70% of grocers right now are adding retail media networks, as we said earlier, this is going to get a lot more complex in a hurry. And hopefully they're going to hew to some kind of standard practices that we can actually work with. A little bit more on the platforms. And this chart, I hope on your screens will be large enough, but what we see here are a variety of off-site, on-site, in-store. And by the way, the in-store area, as we said, it's still only in the hundreds of millions, but we see several digital signage and other forms of in-store networks being set up. There's interaction there, by the way, with the electronic shelf label business. So some of those little screens can actually be message delivery devices, interesting, or they can be networked with other larger screens that are local. We've seen a variety of different kinds of standalone displays. This is not brand new stuff either. The in-store digital signage business, it's worth remembering, goes back to the Walmart in-store network that was launched in the early 1990s. In those days, it was CRT monitors hung in the store. So it's been a long time coming, but even then, Walmart understood that the scale of their traffic represented an audience that would be hard to match through any kind of traditional media. These days, where can you count on shoppers going once a week? Well, almost all of them, at least to one grocery store. So it's a reach opportunity. This is a lot of platforms. The Trade Desk, probably very well known. Criteo, of course. Then the question becomes, as a brand, how many of these do we have to interact with to effectively plan? All right, I feel like I'm repeating the question, aren't I, over and again? But let's go a little bit further. And I want to just say a little bit about in-store, because this was tracked by Solomon Partners, which, by the way, is a Wall Street firm that really focuses on merger and acquisition. And I've been following their publications because for some time they've been suggesting that a wave of merger and acquisition might happen in the grocery business for a variety of reasons. And over the last couple of years, they've factored in retail media as possibly an additional reason why this might occur. So they compiled this list, and this is a better list than I had, of some of the current in-store networks that are available now for retailers. Notice that Walmart Connect is among them. PRN, which goes back almost as far as the original Walmart network. In fact, they were at one time, before they were acquired by Strategies, they were the sales agency for that network up until about the turn of the century. This is a good list. It's in the deck, which I hope some of you will take advantage of if you haven't found it before. Solomon Partners is a company worth following because they are focused on how are people going to make money when grocers combine. Maybe you can tell I'm leading up to something here. Before I get there, it's worth noting that price promotion still the primary reason that folks are using in-store retail network. This comes from a nice piece of research from Grocery TV, which is one of the network operators at this point is approaching some critical mass across the grocery business. So if they're using in-store digital signage for, as the top bar suggests, more than 3/4 of folks are using it for price promotions on items sold in the store, can we distinguish this tactic from trade promotion offers, whether they're broad or whether they're personalized through the loyalty program?
James, a question came up in our chat box here. How much is too much? And another one, what about on shelf?
There we go. Well, how much is too much? That's a good question. Somebody said earlier, did they not, that no is not an acceptable answer. So how much is too much? As a brand, is your distribution important to you? Is it important that your retail partners, whether they are the top of the top 100 list or whether they're 10 or 15 spaces below, that they're vigorous and vibrant distributor of your products? If those retailers are disadvantaged in their overall profitability relative to the giant that operates stores on the opposite corner, how long are they going to still be available to you to distribute your products? And are you going to be able to reach their customers with the same certainty and the same opportunity as the customers of the store across the street? Brands work with a variety of retail distributors because that's how they reach the broad spectrum of their target customers. So too much, gosh, I would counter that with the question. I know that's infuriating, but how do you say no? And if you have to say no, what's your counter offer? And I have a few things to say about that later. If you can be patient, hopefully we'll get to that. And did I answer both questions, John? I think so. I think so. Okay, very well. Well, let's continue. So my point here on this slide is I'm starting to think, when I look at some of these bits of research, that the line's a little fuzzy between trade promotion and at least in-store retail media. And depending how you look at the digital interactions that folks have with their favorite retailers through their apps, maybe digital retail media advertising is, in a way, it's in store, if you want to define that very broadly, that the electronic face of an omni-channel retailer is it's an extension of the store itself. So if the line's fuzzy, here's a question for you. Do your distributors ask you to negotiate trade promotion and retail media investments at the same table? Once again, ask if that comes up. By the way, I thought the answer would surely be no for this question not that long ago. Now I think it's worth asking.
Meanwhile, another comment came up on the chat box.
Yes, please.
It says, it's hard to say no, and by on shelf, I meant digital shelf / item digital signage.
Very well. Got it. Yeah, the digital shelf in the physical store. I'm careful about the terminology because I guess we talk about a digital shelf in the online environment too. But in the physical store, we're seeing some changes in how messaging is being deployed. My My best understanding, and I'm thinking about some of the folks I visited at grocery shop just a few weeks ago in Las Vegas, is that what you mean by digital shelf is a shelf that has some kind of digital signage or communications capabilities attached. Uh, More and more, these are wireless electronic shelf labels and related signs. We do see from the networks larger signs at strategic locations around the store. Some of you might have walked into a grocery store recently and seen a hand sanitizer station near the entrance that has a digital sign on it. Somebody's selling that space and that messaging. So all of that is an effort to convert eyeballs to revenues, no doubt. The intricacy of that is, I think, formidable. I do think that the optimal models are still being worked out. That's the best way to put it. But the shelves themselves these days, when we call the digital shelf, I think mostly what we're seeing now is a shelf that's either got a messaging element on the edge facing out, or an end cap that has the same, or it's being monitored in some way so that we can look at things like takeaway. That's more of a inventory management aspect. But the data from that certainly relates to understanding the return on investment if you put retail media messaging there. Now, I hope that's something of an answer. I think we're going to move on from this poll. So we have no and yes, a few. Here again, the existence of a few conversations like this is enough to persuade me that we're on a track here that's useful when we start to investigate these questions. Shall we go on? Thank you, Linda. Let's go a little further.
One more comment came in. A question: can we measure the value of advertising to consumers when they're in the decision-making process?
I think that's the hoped for reality. So the conversions, I guess, is the term that some in the industry use. It helps that there's a proximity of the message to the act of lifting the product off the shelf, putting in the cart, and then only a few minutes later, bringing it to the scanner at the front of the store. Or if you're using Just Walk Out, perhaps adding it to your shopping list electronically while you're shopping. There are more and more instances of that. Brands should like the fact that a message is delivered, that the delivery of that message can be confirmed, and then an action follows. That kind of conversion data is really useful. And it allows you to do some A/B testing. It allows you to do planning overall to understand the return on your ad investment, at least along certain metrics. So yeah, there's an appeal to doing that. How the message is delivered, well, we have a variety of options. It could be on an electronic sign in the store. It might be on the electronic handheld device that the shopper is using in conjunction with their shopping trip. So we've seen ideas. Well, I've got my store app open while I'm shopping because I'm looking at my deals, and when I reach a certain location in the store, an additional offer is shared to me. The line's a little blurry. Was that a retail media investment, or was it something related to the loyalty program? I don't know if it matters. What should matter? Well, it matters from a management perspective and from the insights perspective. But in the end, did we get a message to the shopper, or did it result in the behavior that we ask for? Is a pretty good metric, right? So sometimes in this conversation, it's a matter of definitions, perhaps. But definitions might matter. And I'll use that as a segue, if I could, to go back into this question about fair share. There's a term we use, all commodity volume. Oops, sorry, would we stay there? Go back. Oops, we bounced. I'd like to stick on this one. Thank you. So this concept of, well, commodity volume should be familiar to everyone here. The total amount of dollar sales for a retailer in a specific market. And the percentage of ACV is a way we understand if a brand is getting its fair share of distribution, right, in the store. And retailers have used that for a long time, and it's always been part of the conversation between brands and retailers for planning purposes. This is one of the aspects where Joel's earlier presentation, it made me think of the nexus between his sharing and ours. And it's also been used as part of the basis for allocating promotion spending. And when it was a simple matter of certain trade allowances, this was, I'll say, easier, not easy, but easier. Let's make sure that we offer our retailers, in proportion to the amount of product they help us sell, the right incentives that are going to enable them to drive sales in their stores. This allocation is, I think, now under some stress in the retail media world. And so that's the next question for the folks on this call. And this is the last of the polls. Since we have a small sample, we're just going to raise the question and take a quick look at responses. How closely do you align your retail media spending with your product distribution across all your retail partners? And the range is from absolutely to not at all. Very good. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, as you might appreciate, the range of questions that I composed here were, I guess I had hoped we'd get a range of answers. There is a custom in our industry of being even-handed, and it has some legal basis as well. But it's challenging to do this well. And not everybody's, apparently on this call at least, is 100% clear on the answer. So let's move ahead now. I have a little more to say about that. Very good. All right, so I'm no lawyer, but I do want to share a little bit about this thing called Robinson-Patman. I think it is a legal framework that is mentioned occasionally in passing, but in fact hasn't resulted in a lot of legal action in the recent world. But Robinson-Patman, gosh, it's 90 years ago, right? 88 years ago, federal law, and it prohibits certain kinds of discriminatory pricing and promotion practices. So you got to offer the same price to everyone that you sell to. That's it, right? A supplier's got to charge the same wholesale price to Walmart and a local corner store if they order equivalent amounts of product. So the same balance. But if a retailer is demonstrably less costly to do business with, your pricing can reflect that advantage. And so big retailers do have some legitimate reasons to get sometimes a better price. Hey, I can order in full carloads. Well, that's an advantage to the brand, of course, that is fair. Pricing is also the result of allowances and services that the retailer provides. And this is where the trade marketing question has come up many times over the years. And the existence of this law has resulted not so much in legal action, but in what I call industry custom. And this is, I think, to the credit of the industry as a whole, is that brands have conducted their activities in a proportional manner. They've conformed with the general intent of the Robinson-Patman Act, but it hasn't needed to be enforced in anyone's recent memory. And in fact, the Federal Trade Commission hasn't brought a measure up, a lawsuit up in many years on this particular topic. There have been 2 or 3 civil actions where a particular retailer raised a complaint and cited Robinson-Patman as a reason. And all right, so but the research that I looked at, it's pretty thin. So what it says is, and this is a pat on the back to the whole industry, is generally this is an industry that has endeavored to work more or less fairly when it comes to providing investment in promotional allowances that affect price. But now we have retail media. And if, as we said earlier, most brands or many brands are only able to deal with a handful of the largest retail media networks because they run out of resources to do the necessary research, are they able to achieve the similar kind of objectives with respect to Robinson-Patman? And this is a question that starts to get above my pay grade. I'm no legal scholar. So I reached out to the FTC. I figured I'd ask them, does it apply? And I want to quote a little piece of the act here. A seller could be liable under the Robinson-Patman Act for discriminating against a disfavored buyer in A, providing advertising, promotional or service or merchandising services, or B, paying allowances in connection with that. So you can't offer special packs or marketing only to favored buyers. Well, that's in theory the reality. The folks at the FTC gave me a flat. I say it's 4 words: we have no comment. And maybe it's because they're a little sensitive about this, minor little merger that's going on in the retail business between 2 of our favorite large retail media operators, Albertsons and Kroger. Maybe they're distracted a little bit, but I'm still hoping to get some kind of formal response from them if I keep digging. But I think this is a question, my suspicion is it hasn't been thought about a whole lot with respect to retail media. And with the change of administration, it's possible the current team won't be around to dig into the questions I'm raising either. So Robinson-Patman. All right, so I did some digging here. There's a lot more to it. And as I hopefully made clear from the beginning of this, I did not believe I could provide you with all the answers, but just some uncomfortable questions today. Although I think that there's going to be more to discuss about this going forward. And it's my intention to help continue shedding light on this. I do want to mention that I got some interesting kind of background comments from people I spoke with, and did some searching. So I like this one. Discrimination, unintentional or not, is happening in the retail world due to retail media, and there's definitely not fair and equitable investment across the board. That's from someone in a position to know, and forgive me for shielding people's identities at this time. But I just can try to confirm for you the veracity of the individuals I spoke with. Each retail media network has its own system, standards, ways of working. It's very challenging for brands to master more than a few. Okay. One expert suggested brands might consider offsetting any imbalance in retail media spending by offering retailers, smaller ones, more trade marketing or shopper marketing to kind of even it out on the overall. Of course, that implies that we are, in fact, doing what we asked about in the prior poll question, discussing retail media, trade marketing, the entire spend in one conversation across the table. Pretty complex thing to try to work out, too. Imagine what those contracts have to look like. Okay. And I did something else, too, and this is marvelous in the world of artificial intelligence. I wanted to figure out what's being said in the Kroger Albertsons legal proceedings, and so this is a time to dig into an AI tool, and I ran several queries with a couple different AI tools to determine if the filings so far, and there are many, many pages in that merger, make any mention of retail media networks, and the responses uniformly said not. So it's not part of that discussion. Although, and I'm going to offer this for your consideration, 2 of the largest grocery retail media networks would be merged if this merger goes forward. So is this a matter of concern for the impact of that merger? The discussion we're hearing, of course, these days is about the number of stores and the locations and the dominance in certain local markets. That's the way the FTC has historically followed its thought processes. It may be that they're not looking at retail media at all. So that's, for me, a matter of fascination. I do want to mention also, and I learned this very late in the game, so it's not reflected in this talk, but the FMI, the Food Industry Association, is doing some work right now on some of the issues that I've raised here. And of course, they represent plenty of smaller retail chains as well. And I learned today that they expect to have some reporting, some positions on this issue in time for the FMI Executive Conference, which I believe takes place in January. I think that, from my perspective, would be quite welcome. I think that it's probably evident to all of you who are listening, in preparing this presentation today, we've kind of raised more questions than we've answered. At least I feel that way. So my commitment to you and to our hosts is that I'm going to keep working on this subject. I want to say that anyone on this call is welcome to contact me if they want to share any notions, raise any other questions. Tell me I'm all wet and I'm just barking up the wrong tree if that's true. What matters here is the truth, and what matters here is an understanding that's going to drive better business, fair business for the participants in the CPG world. And I hope we'll see some installments about this in CPG Matters in the near future, and perhaps after January as well. So with that, I guess I'll turn the floor over to any questions that remain. And thank you for the ones that have come in already. I hope my answers were satisfactory or sufficient. If there are any more, I'm glad to stay on and answer them.
Sure. There are a couple of questions that came in. That one, what do you think about the retail what do you think about retail media with respect to the Albertson-Kroger merger presently being challenged by the FTC? You sort of touched on that. Maybe you want to share some more thoughts.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's being overlooked so far. Let's face it, it's a really complex situation, just in terms of market dominance and the store counts and the necessary maneuvers to satisfy FTC requirements. But it did occur to me that here are the two largest grocery retail media networks, other than Walmart's, of course. And this merger, and it's been a couple of years, hasn't it, since it was first floated, and it's going through this process. In that time, some of you may have noticed that Kroger decided to begin to distribute product through online only in Florida, which I think helped them to cover a piece of geography that was conspicuously missing. Albertsons doesn't have business down there either, do they? So put those pieces together, and a side benefit of the merger might be to create another national retail media network in the grocery world. It's just not being spoken of much. I'd sure like to, ask the CEOs there if they would address it with me. I think that's unlikely, but that's a powerful thing. Remembering that alternative revenues of this kind bring in much higher gross margins than any product that's sold on the shelves. So it would make the resulting company profitable from those revenues in a way that might allow them to be more price competitive. So this is a speculation on my part, but it seems to me this is part of the strategy, and one that's not being brought up, because why would they? And frankly, I'm sure they are not interested in arguing their perspective in the context of the investigations that are going on in the merger itself. But I'm going to be watching this, certainly, and hopefully, if it does unfold that way, I'd be the first to call it out, or among the first to call it out. The potential is tantalizing, and I think I could understand why a large grocery organization that wants to be a national competitor to Walmart would want to make sure that they have the virtual reach, the digital reach as well, that can match it.
Okay, some quick comments that came in while you were talking. Not price competitive, promotionally competitive in terms of eyeball. It will drive their share price and exec bonuses. Interesting comments.
I think, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, and about share price, yeah, you know, uh, the retail media um, surge reminds me of a time in the late 90s when companies were racing to try to add some kind of what they called then e-commerce strategy to their businesses. And you might recall when retail companies and non-retail companies, product marketing companies as well, announced at that time that they had adopted a e-commerce strategy, just those words in a public statement. It was not uncommon to have very significant stock price increases overnight just for saying it. You didn't have to do it. You just had to say you intended to do it. And I was working in the industry at the time, and I came across those instances on more than a handful of occasions where companies were asking the firm I was working with to help them devise that e-commerce strategy so they could get the market bump. Now, I think today, for a grocer that announces it is adding a retail media strategy that is taking action on retail media, that is partly a signal intended to make their investors confident that their business is going to enjoy a fair share of those incremental or alternative revenues and maintain a financial profile that is going to allow them to continue to compete. So that's possibly a reason why this matters. The question is going, as I said, is can they all play in this game or not? Anything further?
I think you have one more question here.
Oh.
How much competitive pressure do you think regional retailers, I guess you mean like the Wegmans and Giant Eagles,
Yeah.
face due to the dominance of the top 10 RMNs?
Yeah, retail media networks. Yeah. You know, this is, I won't say it's my fear, but it is a concern. I think we have some stunningly good regional grocery companies in this country. I mean, that are they're best employers. They're loved by their shoppers. They are dominant in their geographic markets. And the Wegmans, the HEBs of the world come to mind. The Giant Eagles. These companies have been very successful and competitive in their geographies, and they've even done pretty well in e-commerce sales. You know, earning a share that's somewhat on par with some of the large competitors in the e-grocery business. This is a different and additional challenge, and my concern for them is that adding a retail media network adds a significant area of complexity. It complicates the deals that they have to negotiate with brands, and even when they set it all up, brands are challenged to make the most of them. What we don't really know yet is how much are these bespoke solutions, that is designed by those individual retailers. I think in many cases they are. And how does a brand that wants to put together, and let's think of a geographic market where you might find let's pick a Hy-Vee because they've been pretty prominent with their red network the last year and a half. Let's say they're in an area of the country and they have the usual large competitor, Walmart, in overlap in some markets. As a brand, how do you design a retail media strategy that's going to reach both, and they are overlapping audiences? And it's easy to do the Walmart part. You sort of have to. You don't have a choice. Whether you're going to get involved with Hy-Vee, maybe another matter. Again, it comes down to the resources that the brand has to engage with these networks. So my concern is that if retail leaders in these various markets aren't able to obtain a fair, balanced share of retail media spending because of practical complications, that they're disadvantaged in terms of their total financial picture. versus those giants. And remember earlier I said I had been following some reporting from the Solomon Brothers folks. They look at the M&A world, and I think they see the regional players under some relative stress. And of course, they have a stake in this, right? They make money when mergers happen. But I do think they feel that in terms of total value, that there's going to be some opportunities in this market. The reason it hasn't happened faster, my opinion, is that as long as the Kroger-Albertsons matter remains up in the air, other merger deals may be holding back, reluctant to move. So they're kind of waiting for the dust to settle. So I think there's pressure there. I really do. I think, gosh, if there's anything that'll get you in the grocery business, it's the intricacy of the business, right? We make a lot of simple decisions as an industry, and the brands who sell to them the same. Individually, those decisions are not hard. At scale and at speed, they're massively intricate and complex. And retail media adds another layer of complexity for everyone. So big companies on the retail side have some advantage there because of their scale. And I don't think we've seen even close to what this is going to sort out to be going forward. But it could be a world with somewhat fewer grocery chains. It's a possibility. And that remains to be seen.
Okay, that's all the questions we had. So we had a very active attendees on our chat box.
Yeah.
So if you want to continue the conversation with James Tenser, his email is on the screen, jtenser@vsnstrategies.com. Please reach out to him, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. So thanks, James. That was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot.
Thank
and
you.
It's a topic that everyone's going to be following, and the truth is out there, as we say.
All right. Well, can I just say that the engagement by the audience, I take that as the highest form of compliment. So thank you very much to everyone.
Okay, great. So thank you, James.